Well, let's transition with a word of prayer, shall we?
Okay.
Father, once again, we ask you into our presence, and we rely on you to teach us the truth. Thank you for helping us to understand your word and apply even these things that just seem like musty old rules to our lives. Help us to live lives that are pleasing to you and honor you and reflect your glory in every way. Thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. We have come to Exodus chapter 30. It's one of those chapters that so many people love to point to and just say, look at all of those mean old sexist Bible guys. Mm-hmm. Look at how they just dominated women. Why, a woman's oath wasn't any good. She had to go check with her husband first. Actually, that's not quite the way it is. Matter of fact, it's really quite the opposite. So that's all the setup you need for chapter 30. Moses told the leaders of the tribes of the Israelites, okay, first crack. Moses tells them, what does he tell them? This is what the Lord has commanded. Okay, folks, not my idea. This is God's talking, so you can take it, you can leave it, you can say you don't care what God says, that's fine, but this is not my idea. This is what God says. If a man makes a vow to the Lord or takes an oath of binding obligation on himself, he must not break his word, but must do whatever he has promised. Okay? So, pretty straightforward. If a man, not a boy, not a kid, a man makes an oath or a promise, a vow, then he keeps it. He's bound by it. But the rest of the chapter goes on and does something very interesting. Listen to what it says. If a young woman who is still living in her father's house makes a vow to the Lord or places herself under an obligation, and her father hears about her vow or the obligation to which she has pledged herself, and her father remains silent about her, then all her vows will stand. And every obligation to which she has pledged herself will stand. But if her father overrules her when he hears about it, then none of her vows or her obligations which she has pledged for herself will stand. And the Lord will release her from it because her father overruled her.
So what that means is a young woman can say, yes, sweetheart, I'll marry you. And then comes home and tells father we're getting married, and he says, no, you're not.
Let me put it in a slightly different context. Oh, I've got to have that dress. I promise I will pay you next week if you'll let me have that dress today. She takes the dress home, and father says, I really love you. That dress is not worth that price. We're taking it back. And he disavows the oath. He takes the dress back and says, I'm not going to pay for this dress. It's not worth that much. Now you understand, the young woman, this woman's still a youth, still living in her father's house, she has obligated herself. But her father can override her. And you say, wow, he's just dominating his daughter.
It's wisdom over youth.
He's protecting his daughter from being taken advantage of. And so that's on one end of the spectrum. On the other end is, oh, we just have to get married. I love you dearly. And she goes home and says to her father, I'm marrying Romeo. And he says, no, you're not. Now, in our culture, when a woman reaches a certain age, she can say, oh yes, I am, and go do it. Or a boy, for that matter. But the point here is that the father has some authority to override the obligations of his daughter that she makes without his knowledge. Let's go on. And that's the key, the without his knowledge part. And if she marries a husband while under a vow, or she uttered anything impulsively by which she has pledged herself, and her husband hears about it but remains silent about her when he hears about it, the wording is almost exactly the same, then her vows will stand and her obligations which she has pledged for herself will stand. But if when her husband hears it, he overrules her, then he will nullify the vow she has taken. And whatever she uttered impulsively, which she has pledged for herself, and the Lord will release her from it. So she has been overruled. She's made a vow, maybe even a vow, Lord, I'm going to commit this, whatever. It could be a thing, some time, whatever. She says, I'm going to commit this time or this thing to your use. And then she leaves her father's house. Now here's what you have to see about this transition. She's in her father's house. She has made a vow which is not completed. In other words, she's still under some sort of promise. She leaves her father's house. Her father has not disavowed the promise, okay? So it stands. She leaves her father's house and goes into her husband's house. And he can say, I'm going to disavow that. You cannot do that. And you see the transition? She's gone from this authority to this authority, and this authority has not disavowed her oath or vow. But she moves under her husband's authority into his house, and he can disavow it. Because now the obligation has passed from her father to her husband. We're going to see why this is very important. Okay, verse 9. But every vow of a widow or of a divorced woman which she has pledged for herself will remain intact. If she made the vow in her husband's house or put herself under obligation with an oath, and her husband heard about it but remained silent about her, and did not overrule her, then all her vows will stand, and every obligation which she pledged for herself will stand. So she's a married woman, she makes vows, her husband authorizes them, and it can be authorized by silence. When he learns about it and says nothing, that says, I agree. Okay? So she's, yes.
Question here. Verse 9 says, but every vow of a widow or a divorced woman which she pledged for herself will remain intact. Period.
Mm-hmm.
Then all of a sudden they're talking about her husband.
Okay, so she's a widow now, but she's got a vow that has continuing effect.
It's retroactive.
Okay?
Okay.
I'm going to serve in the tabernacle for 1 day every week. I'm committing my Wednesdays to serving in the tabernacle. And so every Wednesday her husband has, it's like, okay, well, the wife's going to be off at the tabernacle doing her thing over there. She's working for the Lord. I'm great with that. I'm glad she's doing that. I affirm her vow. And he dies. Any vow she is under at that time remains intact. And that's what it's saying.
Okay.
So any vow that precedes her widowhood, that is intact at the time she is widowed, she now can't just say, oh well, things have changed, I don't think I'll do that anymore. Because she made a vow. And her husband affirmed the vow, and now he's dead. But that does not release her from her own words. Okay? If she made a vow in her husband's house or put herself under obligation with an oath, and her husband heard about it but remained silent about her, and did not overrule her, then all her vows will stand, and every obligation which she pledged for herself will stand. But if her husband clearly nullifies them when he hears them, then whatever she says by way of vows or obligations will not stand. So if before he died, her husband disavowed her obligation, somebody can't come along after he dies and says, but you promised. Her answer is, my husband disavowed that. He released me from that obligation. And the husband had the authority to do that. So you can't come back later and reinstate it and say, I know you're a widow now, but you promised. No, my husband disavowed that. That nullifies the promise completely. Okay? Any vow or sworn obligation that would bring affliction to her, her husband can confirm or nullify. But if her husband remains completely silent about her from day to day, he thus confirms all her vows or all her obligations which she is under. He confirms them because he remains silent about when he heard them. But if he should nullify them after he's heard them, then he will bear the iniquity. In other words, if there is some fault or guilt attached with her promise, and here's the real blessing to women in this. God's saying, men, I'm laying this on you, but this is not a free ride. You have to look at the situation. Because if there is anything owed or blame to be placed, and you tell your wife she can't do it, it's on you. So the wife remains guiltless because she tried to make amends in whatever way. That may be her vow. And her husband says, oh no, you can't. His debt. Not her debt anymore. Because he has told her she cannot honor that vow. So now it's his debt. And people have recourse obviously against him now. Okay? So,
It's funny that it doesn't say something about being written down. Is it just, do they believe each other?
okay, there are several ancient customs about vows. The one I'm most familiar with is actually Dark Ages into the Middle Ages England. And between men, knives are vows. So a man would give another man a knife at the exchange of a vow. And you could literally, the knife could be a witness in court.
Oh, and in Esther, they gave a shoe.
No, that's Ruth.
That's Ruth, yes, okay. I'm sorry.
Okay? So the man would go into court and say, this knife is a token of the vow I made with so-and-so to perform this and that, and here is my testimony of the vow. So all ancient cultures had ways of marking these things.
Well, I was going to say, because it didn't say here, and I thought, surely not everybody was so honest.
Well, but see, all of this happens publicly. You can't, there's no private vow. So a woman would go and she would make this public oath or promise or vow. Might have been for a sacrifice at the tabernacle. God, you've granted me success in this enterprise. That doesn't happen often. You've granted me success in this enterprise. I want to give you a young goat, just as a love offering, a peace offering. And she goes home to her husband, and her husband says, no, we really can't afford one right now.
Go ahead with what you're saying.
Go
I have
ahead.
a question.
Go ahead.
It seems in verses 14 and 15 like, okay, he has not nullified her vow, and she's keeping the vow on a continuing basis.
Yes.
But then if he decides, okay, that's enough of that, we're going to put a stop to this, and then says she can't do it, then
He can't do that. See,
Well, it sounds-
no, if
No.
you'll read the whole thing, it says he can only nullify the vow on the day he hears of it. So he doesn't have a, I've been thinking about that since you told me last week. And I don't like it.
You mean, okay, I can make a vow. My husband says, no, you can't do that, but then he has to take the vow on him. If he
No.
No, verse 15 says, but if he should nullify them after he has heard them, then he will bear her iniquity.
Yeah, that's what,
Okay, but these are vows that bear some burden of guilt or performance. That is, she has promised to perform something that she ought to do. And he disallows the vow.
Oh,
Then
okay.
the duty falls to him to essentially make her word good. Because there's an obligation. And it doesn't go into the how or why of the obligation. One of the interesting things about this is that what we see here is something we saw a lot of when we were back in Leviticus, is case law. Okay, so you remember back in chapter 27? And the women come to Moses and say, our father has no sons, and you're going to tell us we have to go into the Holy Land and we're going to have no inheritance. Well, Moses talks to God. God says, okay, we got a fix for that. And so a man who has no male heirs, his daughters may inherit. Boom, done. Now, this is all about real estate. When we understand that, then all of this kind of starts to fall into place. So, when a man takes a vow, it's pretty much done. Because a man may obligate his property. Okay? However, okay, past that one. It's important for us to realize that this is actually flying in the face of the common culture. This is a complete counterculture chapter. Why?
because questions come up all the time and they have to provide an answer.
Well, so that's why the case law happened. But what is God telling the people? There's two important things here. One is that women can make oaths.
Women can do what?
Women can make oaths.
Oh, all right.
Okay? The surrounding cultures, a woman could not even think of making an oath. She was one step above the sheep as far as property goes.
Only because she kept the house.
Well, perhaps, or you know, she may have had a husband who truly loved her and a wonderful family and all of those things, but in the eyes of the culture, she was a little more than a possession, and she could not make an oath. All right? As recently as the mid-20th century, a woman in the United States, even though she could vote, when she got married, all of her property became the property of her husband. That's 20th century America.
Yeah, that was even, I mean, not necessarily property, but my son was in the Marines in North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted to get a phone. His wife was 21, he was not.
Mm-hmm.
And so she couldn't sign a contract to get a phone.
He could.
Because he couldn't because he wasn't 21
Yes.
either.
Mm-hmm.
And then whenever he got to be 21, they could get a phone because he could sign the contract.
And had she been single, she could have signed the contract herself.
I don't know, in North Carolina, she might have been
Probably.
able to. Yeah.
But once she got married,
They are about 100 years behind over there.
well, in North Carolina, yeah. So, but you see my point. The larger culture of the time, a woman did not have the ability to make an oath at all. So why are these special rules needed? Okay, so remember we go back a few...
Different.
Huh?
God's people are different.
God's people are different. We go back a few chapters, we've made a special rule that a man who dies with no male heirs, his daughters inherit. as if they were sons. It's about the real estate.
But they couldn't marry outside the tribe.
We're actually going to come to that where it
Oh,
says, if the one restriction on that is that they, in the case of a daughter inheriting, she had to marry within her tribe so the real estate didn't transfer to another tribe.
So could a man take an oath to take the real estate out of that tribe?
No,
No, okay.
no. A man couldn't do that. It's not possible. As a matter of fact, you can't give away or sell land in ancient Israel. You can only lease it
Yeah.
until the next Jubilee year. Which sounds a little bit like Papua New Guinea, but that's another story. Okay, so what we need to understand about this is that it is expanding a woman's rights in the culture. It's saying a woman is a human being before God and can make an oath like any man. However, the real estate follows a tribal line. And because the real estate follows the male tribal line, the man must have the ultimate authority on any oath that affects property. And oaths always affect property. So this is a protection for the ancestral land rights and an expansion of women's rights. So it says, women can make oaths and obligate themselves, but the man the man who is in authority over the land where she's under authority can override that oath, disavow that oath in protection of the land, the real estate. This is always, almost always, about real estate. But at the same time, it's about expanding the rights of a woman to participate in the culture as an equal with men.
You know, prenuptial agreements nowadays would accomplish the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
They would ensure that a woman got what was rightfully hers going into the marriage.
Or doesn't get something that somebody didn't want her to have. It could be
Yeah,
anything.
yeah.
And it could go either way.
Yeah.
Okay,
Could
so,
be a bad thing or a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Can you have a prenup that says, if I die before you, you have to take everything?
Oh, darn.
Not much point in that.
Even that clown suit you wore all the time.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so what we're looking at is an expansion of woman's rights. So the last case in this case study is what about a woman who is widowed or divorced? Okay. Things you get when you stop and say, what did that say again? And you read it a few more times. Do you recognize that a divorced woman is on the same legal footing as a widowed woman? Did you catch that? If a woman is widowed or divorced, same legal status, yes.
But a woman couldn't divorce her husband during that.
Yes, she could.
She could.
A woman could divorce
A
her
woman
husband.
could divorce her husband, yes.
A man could divorce
Now,
his wife.
tradition later changed that, but there's nothing in the law of Moses that says she can't.
I see.
I thought it was only the man who could divorce the woman.
It was much easier culturally for a man to do it, but it was not illegal for a woman to do it. So a woman could divorce, but it was more likely that a man would divorce. So,
Well, especially since he had all the money in his pocket.
well, he controlled the land.
Well, that's money
Okay,
though.
now see, and here's the issue for a woman going through a divorce. she now, and this is the same as if she is widowed, right? If she has sons, remember the land is not about whether she's worthy to inherit, it's about whether there is a male heir. Because the land has to stay in the tribe. So if she's widowed, then her son would automatically become the owner of the land, and it is presumed that he would take very good care of his mother. Okay? But at the same time, she is now, because she's widowed, and the land is in his name, and she owes no authority of obedience to him. That is, she's not under his authority, and she cannot obligate him in any way with an oath or a vow. She now is a free moral agent with no real estate connected to her promises. And that's what we have to understand about this. This is about protecting the real estate. It's not about the rights of the woman. The whole chapter is about granting rights to woman that a woman never imagined she would have in another culture. Because now we see women who can make oaths and obligate themselves in a legal way.
Okay.
Can't do that in other cultures.
And how do we know that it's about real estate?
Because everything in this whole section is about real estate. What we're about to see is, well, this whole section really is about they begin the conquest on the east side of the Jordan, and the real estate is divided up there. And in the midst of this, the daughters of Zelophehad come to Moses and say, we need an inheritance. And we have a couple of intervening chapters, but then we have this. So it's like this is dropped in here. Remember, this is not a sequential chain of events. Everything is in here as a matter of clarification. That's what the book of Numbers is primarily. It's to clarify all of these practices. And so these daughters are told, yes, you can have an inheritance. And so the question then comes up, well, what about my daughter who? So this is the answer to that. So this chapter is while it's not, may not be temporally, that is in time, sequence of events, be connected with the daughters of Zelophehad. It is connected in theme. And most of the book of Numbers is not about the chronology of events, although there are some basic time sections in it. Within those sections, things are sometimes very clearly not laid out chronologically.
Yeah.
And so these are just things about this kind of inheritance. What happens when? And so this is all in this section 27 to 30.
I'm assuming that the Jewish nation, do they look at this still?
I don't know how closely they follow it.
But it's always been about the land for them.
Well, yes
Or
and
for
no.
God it was.
Yes and no. I would say the modern Jewish nation doesn't get this. I would say the Jewish nation at the time of Christ didn't get this. Okay? They read it the way most people read it because they don't go back and look at the context. And one of the things, this is probably the most important thing about reading this kind of scripture. When you read it, you have to ask yourself this question. When God gave this to someone, or when Moses spoke these words, or when some scribe wrote down these words that Moses said, or when, whatever, at that point, the people to whom it was written, or the people who listened to the words, what did they hear? And you always hear more than a mere translation of words. You hear the context. You see and feel and touch and taste and smell the context of the words. And so when they're hearing this, they're hearing it in the context of women have been obviously elevated in status. And that elevation brings with it some certain obligations. How do we answer those questions? And so this comes as an answer to the "what about my daughter who?" In response to the daughters of Zelophehad, who have now been told they can inherit just like men. And God has said, and this is going to be the way it is from now on. Okay? So, what did they hear? And what we have to think of the context they're hearing this in. What it meant in their ears. And what it would clearly mean to them is women can make oaths. That would be the big thing they would hear. Now, women, there are some protections in here for you. If. But you see, the theme of this is not some man in your life can get you out of an oath. The theme of this is women can make oaths. Big idea. Big cultural change. So, thank you for coming to the Cornerstone Christian Church Women's Sunday School class. Taught by this guy.
Sue Ellen wants to do it next week.
No, that's okay.
2 minutes. That's okay, I'm done.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
finished.
You did that well.
Any other questions? Okay, one more slide. So, just to recap, from the time of Christ to the time, from the time of Moses to the time of Christ, in most cultures, even into America, a woman had no rights. Just didn't. We talked about American culture in the 20th century. And so a woman could not make a vow. She could not obligate herself without her husband's signature. Think about that. 20th century America. Okay? So, Israel, as God's particular possession, were supposed to be an example both of worship and civil life. And one of the things God has done is to show them that women work alongside men as equals in the civil society. This is not a new idea. Gloria Steinem did not come up with this. It's God's idea. The problem is, we keep messing it up. Because, well, let's face it, we're broken humans. But that men and women are equal in value and intellect and purpose and in ability in the civil culture is God's idea. And I hope we can take that away from this. That this is not God saying, women, some guy can just annul any oath you make. It's saying, women, you have a right to participate too. But I have to protect the land I've given to Israel. And that's what this is about. Okay? So, here's the thing. It comes right down to this. Therefore, preparing your minds for action and being sober-minded, set your hope fully on the grace that will be brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ. As obedient children, do not be conformed to the passions of your former ignorance, but as the one who called you is holy, you also be holy in all your conduct, since it is written, you shall be holy, because I am holy. Peter quoted Leviticus there. You see, God's idea hasn't changed. His purpose for the church is to be an example of right living, holy living in front of the world. You see a church that doesn't treat women well, I will show you a church that does not honor God. Because God says that's the way you ought to treat people. God does not show a distinction. Now there's some places, there are some places where we have clear separation in authority. That's okay. But that doesn't mean God does not value women in the church and in the society as equals of any man. I guess I'll stop there. Let's pray. Father, go ahead.
And do you think that it's pretty much Paul's idea when he says he doesn't allow women to teach and that sort of thing?
That's a whole other study, and no, it's not his idea, and he's exactly correct, but most people misunderstand that one just like they misunderstand this one. And we'll talk about that later when we get to that, because we'll get to that.
Okay.
Okay? Father, thank you for your word, for the promise that you love us, and you extend your grace to each and every one of us. And you call each and every one of us into your family. And you are willing to adopt each and every one of us. Man, woman, boy, girl, rich, poor, old, young. You call us. Father, we respond to your grace and your love and ask you to make us emissaries into the world around us, displaying your character in everything we do, not just in our life at church, but in our business life and every way we engage our culture. Help us to reflect your character. Help us to be holy, because you are holy. In Jesus' name.